Handheld EC here, and today I'm going to be talking about the Switch 2 versus the Steam Deck and which one, is better for you to buy as a person and as a customer. Now, this isn't based on my own opinion, guys. Obviously, as you can see, I have both. Now, I'm going to go over this in a few categories. So we can start with the price of each system. So the Steam Deck, from what I understand, has a range of different prices depending on how much storage you want within the actual system itself, but the base price for a Steam Deck at the same level of a Switch 2 when it comes to storage and capabilities is around £349, which obviously these are obviously in British currencies, whilst the Switch 2, the only model of the Switch 2 that I currently have, the minimum price without a game is £395. So there is about a 40, 45, £50 difference when it comes to the price of these systems. Now, you can argue the reason for that is obviously due to the hardware within the Steam Deck being what it is, obviously being a more powerful PC, and the Nintendo Switch 2 being including the dock and all that sort, and obviously motion controls and all that sort of stuff, which they would obviously have to factor into the price. Now, next thing we need to cover is games. And the Steam Deck obviously has a lot more games, which is obviously just a point to make. The Steam Deck has obviously a larger library because it's connected to Steam, although not every game that runs on Steam Deck is Steam Deck verified. So likewise, not every game that is on Steam will run on Steam Deck, but also some games that aren't Steam Deck verified will run quite well. It really depends on your luck, really, and what games you've obviously got, and whether or not they're verified, or whether or not you try them out, and whether or not they require stuff like, precision mouse controls, whatever. Because there are mouse pads on the Steam Deck, but obviously you really got to hope that the developer has obviously made the game be able to run, or Steam themselves have made it be able to run. Also, the Switch 2, you're basically guaranteed that every game on the Switch 2 is going to run on the Switch 2, which is a point that people need to obviously also need to factor in when they're buying one of these. Another thing you always got to address is obviously the first-party stuff. So obviously Steam has their own games. Obviously Valve has made their own games over the years. They're all on the Steam Deck. You can play them all. Half-Life, brilliant. CSGO, brilliant. When it comes to the Switch 2, currently you have Nintendo's first-party output on the Switch 1. And you also have obviously games like Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza. And those are great games, but obviously the main selling point for a Steam Deck is not the first-party stuff, it's more so the third-party PC games like Baldur's Gate 3, like Cyberpunk 2077. And whilst, the Switch 2 does have games like Cyberpunk 2077 and Street Fighter 6, it is not obviously the same library. It's not as diverse library that the Steam Deck has, but also you've got to factor in, obviously, Nintendo's first-party stuff in that argument, because Nintendo themselves have quite a strong first-party lineup, and many people that will be buying the Switch 2 will either be buying it for Nintendo's first-party games, or they'll be buying it for one of their children. Because obviously, Nintendo IPs are a lot more family-friendly and a lot more aimed at children than games that you'd get on the Steam Deck. In a lot of cases, a lot of the Steam games you will see are like GTA 5, or like Cyberpunk 2077, for example, or like Baldur's Gate 3, like games that are like clearly more mature and wouldn't appeal to as big an audience as they won't appeal to the same audience as games like Nintendo IPs. Another thing we need to factor in is emulation. The Steam Deck is a beast when it comes to emulation. You can basically use EmuDeck and whatnot on it to just basically emulate any system that is currently available. Now, there are some limitations, obviously, because you got to obviously go get your own ROMs and all that sort of stuff, and that is in PC mode, from what I understand. I've done it once or twice with my Steam Deck, but obviously I'm not that good at emulation stuff. But the Switch 2 doesn't have that. The Switch 2's form of emulation is basically its Switch Online catalog and whatever's released in the eShop, because Nintendo will obviously brick your system if you try to mod it. Now, personally, I feel like Nintendo should allow people to like mod their systems and stuff, because obviously people have paid the money for it. People have paid to buy the system. Like, they have given you the money, so you should let them do what they want with it. But obviously, if you want a more so emulation sort of style of system, then the Steam Deck is obviously a lot better decision to buy. Now, I don't hate either system. I do think they're both quite useful. They're quite good, and they both have their own uses, especially for their own different libraries, because obviously the Switch 2 is obviously heavily on Nintendo stuff. If you're buying a Nintendo console, you're probably buying it for Nintendo games. A Steam Deck obviously is great as well if you like PC games, or you like more third-party stuff than you would probably get on like the Switch 2 or an Xbox or a PlayStation. Realistically, which one do I think is better? Well, if you're looking at price, comparing like the price to actually the library of stuff, I do think the Steam Deck is actually better for price value, but I also think the Switch 2 is serving a different market because, yes, they're both obviously, handhelds, but also, and yes you can dock both because I know there's a Steam Deck dock, but the Switch 2 was designed to be both a handheld and a console. Well, the Steam Deck was originally designed as a handheld PC to play PC games on the go, and sort of Switch 2 sort of feels more like the main gimmick is that it is its own device, whilst the Steam Deck feels more so like an add-on for your Steam library if you already have a Steam library. So realistically, it depends on what you guys want the most. Do you prefer, a powerful PC that plays all AAA games from many different publishers and stuff? Because you can also put like libraries from like services like GOG and Epic Games Store on Steam Deck, so that's something you need to factor in as well. Would you prefer to have a powerful PC handheld where you can play basically any game that you want on it? You can do emulation on it, and you can obviously take it with you, and obviously it's slightly cheaper. Or would you rather have the home console handheld hybrid, which is more so aimed at a more family audience and has obviously Nintendo's own first-party output, plus its own suite of apps and features based on obviously what Nintendo wants to provide their customers? It really depends on what you guys think is like more important for you. Obviously, let me know what you guys think about this in the comments down below. Obviously, as you can see, I have both. Obviously, you don't have to buy both if you don't want both. If you can only afford one, you need to factor in what you think is best for you. And, don't take this as me telling you buy a Switch 2, buy a Steam Deck. Make your own decision with your own money. I'm not trying to tell you what you should or shouldn't do with your money. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. Which one do you think is better, the Steam Deck or the Switch 2? Let me know what you think. I've been EC. Subscribe, like, share. I'm trying to hit, 1,100 subscribers. I'm like 19 away, so make sure you give me a subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.